Hi everyone, welcome to the Hair Loss Show. I'm Dr. Vikram Jayaprakash.
And I'm Dr. Russell Knudsen.
In this episode, we're going to tackle derma rolling again, so stick around.
Welcome to the Hair Loss Show. Dr. Russell Knudsen and Dr. Vikram Jayaprakash discuss issues relating to hair loss and the medical and surgical treatment of hair loss in both men and women.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. Thanks again for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Okay, so today's video we want to talk about derma rolling again. Derma rolling is a very popular topic. A lot of people love doing this because it's a home remedy or home therapy that they can do in the comfort of their own home, and it acts to stimulate their hair. But I thought what we do is take a little slightly different tack and talk about the role of derma rolling in combination with other topical therapies that we may use and how it impacts that.
So a brief recap is that the concept of derma rolling is to make a micro injury into the scalp, which initiates repair mechanisms, which involves growth factors, and therefore your body's own growth factors are doing the work of stimulating the hair as a byproduct of repairing the micro injuries from the derma rolling.
You also get more blood supply to the blood flow to the area, and therefore more nutrients and all.
So that's its principal use, but the specific use we're talking about today is if you're going to use it to influence topical drug delivery to the scalp, how does that work? And I suppose the answer is if you are using something like minoxidil or finasteride topically, normally it will absorb mostly down the orifice in the skin around the hair, which blocks off at about 1 millimeter down. So you're going to get about 1 millimeter's penetration of the drugs into the scalp. However, if you use a derma roller, and let's just say that you use a 1.5 millimeter needle, so there's the skin surface and you're at 1.5 millimeters deep down here, then you're already deeper than it would go in ordinarily because it will seep down into the little hole that you've made with your needle on your derma roller. So in theory, using it will allow a better penetration of both those medicines into the skin and therefore potentially a more positive clinical effect.
So potentially, yes, because I think this opens up things for a couple of issues. Well, first of all, we talk about you gave the example of 1.5. 1.5 is, let's be clear, it's not a universal number for everyone. That may be insufficient for some people in terms of just a needle depth for a derma roller. That may be too much for someone else. So if you're, for example, doing 1.5 and you're sort of getting blood, flowing down from your scalp, then that's too much. But the question I want to ask, because we don't, I know this, it's not something we use a lot in our practice, but we know a lot of our patients do this. The increased penetration or delivery to the drug to that area, does that increase the frequency of side effects? So, for example, with minoxidil, if you've got a higher penetration, are you more likely to get that sort of vasodilation, headache sort of effect in those instances? And but in addition to that, if you're talking about finasteride, well, we know topical finasteride still has a systemic effect, and people do get side effects. So, are you going to get a higher incidence of those side effects with you derma rolling it in?
I don't know that there's a very clear answer, but I will remind our viewers that there is a dose-response curve for minoxidil for percentages, and it levels off at 5%. So we know there are a lot of people that use 7%, 8%, 10% minoxidil topically. But from the initial studies, it leveled off at about 5, which is why that's what you combine in the pharmacy or the chemist, because there's no point going higher if you've got a flattened effect. But it doesn't mean that you don't change the pharmacodynamics of it once you make holes in the skin and apply it into a hole. And this is going to be the trick here, is going to be trying to understand. Because if you hadn't been doing derma rolling before you tried this, and you got a result, then how much of it is the derma rolling and how much of it is the topical application of minoxidil or finasteride? So if you've got a 12-month history of doing derma rolling before you attempt any of this, and then you get a significant boost after applying either the minoxidil or finasteride,
You can quantify it.
then you could quantify it and say, yes, it's made a difference. But if you haven't done derma rollers or microneedling before, then it's going to be quite confusing because there's no real easy way to answer that. And I don't think there is just any way for you to unpack that to the level.
And the problem with that, as you know, conceptually, is that we know that if you're going to prescribe someone minoxidil, if you're going to recommend someone use it, it should be used on a regular basis. But you don't want to do derma rolling on a daily basis, for example. So are you going to get different amounts? It gets messy. This is where that's where get different amounts on a different days.
The half-life of minoxidil in the skin, right, is 21 hours. Right, which tells you that it can be used once a day, but it would need to be used regularly if it's only going to have a clinically important effect for 21 hours. It's going to need to be taken regularly, and the biggest problem we have with patients is compliance. So it's a very, very good point that you make. So I think that that if you're a regular user of minoxidil and you wanted to say, well, okay, I'm going to use derma rolling as well, is that going to be okay? Well, the answer is if you're going to derma roll it twice a week, that's fine, with their application of the minoxidil, provided you're using the minoxidil every other day.
Yes.
And don't just rely upon the derma rolling to do it for you. And I think that's very important for minoxidil. I don't know that there's a great answer for finasteride. I know that when people are using topical finasteride, they still use it daily. Yeah. Now, again, the length of time that finasteride stays in the skin at a clinically significant level is 30 days. So I'm not sure of necessarily the science behind the fact that people would use it every day in that circumstance, because it's a very different chemical profile to minoxidil. But I think that people just need to understand that people come to me on 5 different things all the time, and I say, it's very hard for me to explain to you what's doing what, because you're doing so many things and you start them all at the one time, and so I like to do a stepwise approach. I like to do 1 or 2 things, then assess that over 6 to 12 months, and then, if we're not getting the result we want, then add something.
Absolutely.
But 1 at a time, because otherwise
you can't quantify it. If you do 3 different things, you don't know who's doing the heavy lifting of all of those. Is it a 33% of each one, or is one doing 60% and one's doing 5%? We're just not able to quantify it.
So I guess what I'm saying is, if you're already using, say, topical minoxidil, and then you want to add derma rolling in, as long as you've been using the minoxidil for long enough for us to assess an effect, which is minimum 6 but preferably 12 months, and then add the derma rolling in, then perhaps we could make an objective opinion for you. If you're already derma rolling, you need to have been derma rolling for 6 to 12 months before you add the minoxidil in, again, for us to be able to offer comment.
Yeah. But I think at the end of the day, we're not advocating that if you're using the minoxidil daily to start derma rolling daily, because I think that can cause potential issues as well.
That's trashing the skin, and that's overly damaging it. The point is that you want to do just micro damage so that you've got micro repair. And it's sort of this topic is kind of halfway between topical application of medication and direct injection.
Yes.
With mesotherapy, which is increasingly popular in certain countries in the world, where you directly inject the minoxidil, or you directly inject the finasteride, or you directly inject the dutasteride, or even estrogen in some countries. And the idea, again, by doing this direct injection is to get high local levels that aren't in the general circulation, and therefore reduce the risk of side effects. But the science isn't clear on this yet. We don't have good answers about how effective that is, because we've both had experiences now with patients who came in and said, I was on topical finasteride for 4 days and I started getting side effects. Yes. 4 days. So if you're the person who's very sensitive to it, I think you're very sensitive to it, whichever mode of delivery is done. And so as much as we like to think that using topical is going to avoid problems, it doesn't necessarily get you out of the woods. and it may not be as effective in some people because there are varying concentrations that people are using of them.
There's no standardized...
And there's no standardization of it. And so for finasteride, for example, people argue that 0.25% is the equivalent of taking a milligram orally. But most people start on 0.1%, for example. And so I think, again, it's a very complicated subject. I understand why patients are attracted to the idea of not taking something centrally, and using it topically. We can also get to the discussion about using sublingual delivery systems because that bypasses the liver, degrading it. So that's supposedly, again, getting higher concentrations, and that's a very useful thing if you're not prepared to swallow a tablet, but which puts it through your gut and puts it through your liver, but you're prepared to put it under your tongue, and therefore it absorbs directly into the bloodstream without going through that process. Then you might deliver higher levels to the scalp. These are all nice theoretical advantages to these things, but it doesn't stop people having their individual response to them.
And that's the key, isn't it? Is to find out what your specific response is to the dose that you're taking, and then tailor it to that particular individual.
But I think the other important point about it is that we can give all of the best advice in the world and have all the best remedies in the world for people to use, but they've got to be willing to use them.
Yes.
And this is where we have to be flexible and think, okay, what do I'm not asking you to take this for a week like an antibiotic or 2 weeks. I'm asking you to take this indefinitely. What are you prepared to do? And if you've got objections, we'll try and answer them. If you've still got objections but you're prepared to go in this direction, then we have to support that because you doing something is better than doing nothing. But you've got to do it regularly. You've got to be happy to do it regularly, otherwise it isn't going to happen.
Yes. Very good. I enjoyed that. There's a lot to unpack there. But yeah, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that discussion on microneedling or derma rolling. And we'll see you again on the next episode.
Thanks, everyone.